Cell phone, would you either turn it off or put it on vibrate, so we don't interfere with the program. We want to welcome you to this presentation of the Cades Cove.
Thank you. And now we need to seat the panel. So, 8 seats, panelists. Lucy had an order lined out, so I don't know if she's told everybody where they're going to be seated. And we have a pass around microphone. Let's turn it on. Okay, we should be ready to go. Thank you for coming. It's 10:30 in the morning, so help me get us in a fun mood here this morning. I'll tell you up front, Katie and I went to Renfro Valley one time and saw the late Merle Haggard, and it was early afternoon. But Merle, they came out and kicked off a tune or two, and Merle looked at his band and he said, you have to bear with us. He said, it's still early in the morning for these boys. He said, most of the time they're still puking this time of day. So maybe we can keep a good mood going here. We're set up to share some Cades Cove humor with you. And first we'd like to find out a little bit about who we're talking to, and then we'll introduce our panel. How many, do we have any Cades Cove natives in the audience? Leon and Kathy, oldest brother and niece. Any other natives, Cades Cove? Descendants of Cades Cove. I got a bunch of Myers cousins here, yeah. All right, descendants of Cades Cove. Cades Cove Preservation members, CCPA members, thank you all. Okay, we're going to introduce the panel, but I'll tell you, I'm Larry Sparks, and I grew up in Cades Cove. I was 12 when we moved out. I'm number 11 of our 12 Sparks L's, and we have some more up here for you, but we'll start with the panel up here, Lois Kay maybe. Pass the microphone down if you will. Okay, just tell us who you are. And
I'm Lois Kay Russell. I'm also the Sparks family. I'm Larry's sister, 2 years older than him. He was actually born on my birthday, and so we've always shared a special thing there. But I'm the 10th child of the Sparks family.
I'm Dorothy Gregory Sutton. I was born in Cades Cove to Howard and Ora Lane Gregory.
I'm Judy Myers Johns. My parents were Hugh and Verna Birchfield Myers. I was counting on the way over here. I've passed the point. I'm 63, and I lived in Cades Cove 30 years, so I hated that transition.
I'm Stephen Weber. My mother was Johnny Geneva Oliver, daughter of John W. Oliver and Nancy Ann Whitehead.
I'm Bernard Myers. My parents were Goldman and Viola Birchfield Myers. I was born in Cades Cove, 1936, so you can do the math on that one.
I'm Laverne Sparks McCarter. I'm in the Sparks family, and I'm the 5th one.
I'm Ruth Kay Davis. All these are cousins of mine one way or another up here. My parents were Kermit and Lois Schuler Cohorn. They were the last folks that lived on the Loop Road in Cades Cove. Dad passed away in 1999, and Mom moved out right after that. She's 91 now and still doing pretty good.
I'm Lucille Sparks Britton, and I'm in the Sparks family, and I'm the 4th child.
Thank you. As you can tell, they're bona fide heritage, Cades Cove heritage families. We had, of course, for those who may not know, the park bought everybody out by 1934. And there's a few families left over there to lease land for various periods of time. Our families were fortunate enough to lease until they started phasing out the leases, with the exception of Stephen Weber here on the corner. Stephen, he spent almost as much time in Cades Cove as we did, riding with his granddaddy John W. Oliver over there to the Primitive Church. But anyway, we're fortunate to be here to tell you some stories of how life was. It's generally going to be how it was as renters or leasees. And of course, the land we leased was originally land owned by our families beginning back from the Calhoun Treaty of 1819. So a lot of our roots go very deep into the history of Cades Cove. A lot of people have taken looks at us and just trying to figure out who we are and what we were about. And I want to share with you an Englishman that came through in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and he did an assessment of the Smoky Mountain people as most of the world was trying to figure out who we were over there. His name was Cecil Sharp. He founded English folk dance. Now, what that has to do with him finding out who we were, you have to figure that out. But his assessment's on file at Duke University. And here's what he said about the Smoky Mountain people. Few are able to read and write. However, they are good talkers. Yet they possess wisdom and abundant knowledge of nature. They are friendly. Physically, they are strong and of good stature, though usually square in figure. I don't know about that one. They carry themselves superbly and with a sure-footed swinging gait as they cross footlogs over the creeks. Their footlogs caused us anxious moments. So this guy, he come across a footlog, but he invented English folk dance. Our topics today, we have 70 stories we try to get to you in 60 minutes, so we move this thing fast. And our topics come from medicine, church, bears, tourist questions, snakes, outhouses, real ghosts, and family funnies. And to make sure that all these are on the up and up, I screen tested all these stories. And if it did not go through this screen, I threw it out. So we've got most of them. I guess you could call that a Smoky Mountain lie detector. We're going to start off with Sister Lucy. She's got a story on, we're in Cades Cove Medicine, by the way. She's got one on wart removal. Lucy?
Okay, I had this wart on my elbow probably for 2 or 3 years, and I would bump it all the time and it would bleed. And I'd bump it and it would bleed. So one day, Leslie, my brother, and I were pitching horseshoe, and we got into a fuss. So he threw a tobacco stick at me and hit me on the elbow where the wart was, and he knocked it off. And it bled forever, but it never came back. So that's a way to get rid of warts.
I can tell you, Leslie was pretty good on that. I reminded him this morning you were going to tell that story, but he took one off my knee one time, so he was pretty much a practitioner. He cut the top of it off, took a wild cherry limb, and squeezed the juice out, put on that wart, and my wart came off. Now, don't try this at home, okay? I don't want to go to jail for practicing medicine without a license. And we're going to Ruth on Jay Cawhorn's remedy for an object in your eye.
Jay was my dad's younger brother, and of course they put up a lot of hay and were outside all the time. No one ever wore any protective safety goggles that you're supposed to wear. Anyway, he would quite often come to Mom, and he'd usually have a little bitty button with him. If he didn't, he'd ask her if she had one. She'd go prowl in her button jar and find one and bring it out. And he would sit in the chair just real still and hold his eye open from above and below. And she would put that button in up under the upper eyelid and pull his lid down over it. And he would sit there for a while working that button around. And then he'd say, I think it's got it. And she'd take the button out, and that piece of grit would have gone to the button eye, and that's how they got rid of it.
That works. Also, Ruth, I've got you down for Grandpa Schuler, colds and flu.
Grandpa Schuler was my mom's dad, and he was born in North Carolina, and they came across the mountain into Cades Cove. And whenever Mom was little and all their kids, her brothers and sisters were little, his favorite cure for anything was hot ginger tea. So if they had the measles or mumps or no matter what it was, he'd say, Laurie, make some ginger tea for Lois. And she'd make hot ginger tea, and Mom would have to drink the whole cup down pretty quickly, and they'd cover her up in bed with a lot of quilts, and she would, come into a deep sweat, and that would make the measles break out or the mumps, come to a full-blown case or whatever. Even if it was just a fever, she'd get really hot, and then supposedly that broke the fever, and they'd begin feeling better.
Okay. And while you're on, Grandma Anthony pierced ears and no tomatoes.
Well, I reckon tomatoes weren't always eaten like we eat them now. But they were afraid to eat them. They thought they were poisonous, and they called them love apples. And so they just grew them like flowers to look at and enjoy their beauty. When Grandma was, this was my great-grandmother, she was a Lee choir, married an Anthony, and when she was quite young, she had her ears pierced, and her mother told her that if you had your ears pierced, it would help your vision. So she wanted that done early. Did you all not know that?
And Bernard, we're going to Bernard. There was a little medicine making going on up some of the hollers in the cove. And Bernard, what about that panther scream up the holler?
Usually, let me go back. When I was small, I was terrified of panthers. And if I heard someone say that they heard a panther squall up a certain holler, you could bet I wouldn't be around. So, but usually if you heard someone tell us that they heard a panther up a certain holler, there was usually a moonshine still up there, and they didn't want any kids prowling around.
Making medicine. And one I told in Townsend on Aunt Iva Myers, snuff box. If you know what a snuff box is, she had a little snuff can. And inside that lid of that can was a little spoon that folded out. And none of us used tobacco in our 12 L's. So when they would be on our front porch on a Sunday afternoon, Uncle Dan and Aunt Ivy would use a little tobacco. And so she would take that little spoon and get that snuff and pull her lip out And all the time she was doing this, we would all keep inching up to try to see how all that worked. Well, unbeknownst to us, Aunt Iva was watching us. So when you get within an arm's reach, she would reach out and grab your lower lip and twist it and try to put the snuff in it. You know that, don't you, Nita? She could grab a lip. Another one is about our great-grandmother, Jane Potter Sparks. Our great-granddaddy was Nathan. And she had a little medicine bottle that she kept. Now, she was born in 1828, to give you a little idea here. She died almost 98 years old in 1925 in Cades Cove. And she had a little medicine bottle she kept on some kind of little bag on her rocking chair that she used. And also, I'm told she had a corncob pipe with a 12-inch stem on it that she smoked a little bit with. But they were taking her somewhere in the back of a wagon and crossed Abrams Creek and bounced her out in the creek. This was late in life. She was probably in her 90s. And she said they jumped back there trying to pick up grandmother. And she said, "Don't worry about Grandma. Would somebody get my little medicine bottle that's floating down the creek there?" Okay, we're going to church services in the Cove. And Stephen, we've got you down for the first one on the Primitive Baptist Church. A whipping was in order with your granddaddy.
When my grandfather and grandmother were courting, of course, the churches in the Cove were the center of the social activity. And they were going to a function at the church, and people were bringing food, and she had made some cakes and was carrying them in tins. Well, a lot of people, even at that young age, still resented my grandfather because he was don't want to use the term progressive, but he was a modern man and always tried to improve life in the Cove. And of course, there's always some people who would oppose that. So they got word that some rowdies were going to jump him and beat him up at this function in the Cove. He had 2 pistols on him. He had one in each pocket. And as they were leaving the Cove, these rowdies approached him. And my grandmother took those cake tins and started approaching them and beating them over the head with those cake tins. And of course, everybody laughed, and it got humorous at that point, and it was dispelled and nothing happened. Everybody went home happy.
Except the ones that had a knot on their head.
Right.
And Mr. Fox, Stephen, while we're on the Primitive Church.
Okay, Mr. Fox. Of course, a lot of the stories I tell are the ones I've heard, but this one I experienced myself. In my family, when we were growing up, we never heard profanity. It wasn't on either my father's side or my mother's side, either aunts and uncles. My parents never heard profanity. Now, that doesn't mean time you're 7, 8, 9, you weren't hearing these words and establishing your own repertoire of cuss words. And on several occasions, I made the mistake of using them within the earshot of my mother. And, that Dial soap leaves a lingering taste in your mouth. But on one occasion, we went to the Cove with grandfather and went to the Primitive Baptist Church, and he got out of his car and went directly to the cemetery. And on my grandmother's marker, some wild beast had backed up and left his calling card. He said, "Just look at that, would you?" He went over to the fence where the leaves had blown and piled up, and got a handful of leaves and wiped it up. And took out his clean white handkerchief and wiped up all the residue. You know, as kids were standing there looking at that, and I said, Grandfather, was that a bear? He said, no, Mr. Fox did that. If I'd been here when he did it, I'd kick that sumbitch clear across his graveyard.
And we're still at the primitive church. Judy, dirty feet.
Well, I have to say something about dipping first. My
Okay.
grandmother dipped May Schuler Myers, and I remember her sitting on the porch, and she'd lean back and then put her fingers up here, and I bet she'd spit 20 feet. We couldn't do it. We tried and tried and tried, but she was pretty good at the spitting. But we lived in 3 different houses down in the cove, and then I spent the majority of the time up near the campground where we had electricity. But we moved from the Noah Birchfield house to the Gregory house at Tater Branch when I was probably 5. And my grandmother's house was next door, so there was a foot washing at the Primitive Baptist Church. So Mama and I walked from there at Tater Branch up to the church, probably a little more than a mile. And there's a high probability I hadn't bathed in the first place, but certainly walking up there barefoot, you know, we called it splitting cow piles. You know, if you saw one, you did your best, you know, to make it splatter. So I'm sure my feet were not in good shape when we got there. But if you've been in the church, over on the very left, if you're facing the pulpit, over on the left-hand side, the deacons, as I remember, sat over there. So, you know, they were this lofty body that I was scared of anyway. So they started over there, and they had this water, and they were I think it was a wash pail or pan, and they were coming by and washing everybody's feet. And the further along they went, the more they got in the spirit. And my grandmother was a quiet little woman, and really, I remember her being tiny. But my grandmother got in the spirit, and holy cow, she was walking up and down the aisles, and she was raising her, you know, scared to death. So that meant, you know, everybody in the church got in the same mode, and that wash basin kept coming, and it kept coming, and it got to me, and I started to cry, and they kept going. They missed me. I was too young.
They probably thought those feet weren't.
I don't know, but
they
it
couldn't do much for them.
They were pretty. I know they were bad.
Okay.
We didn't wear shoes in the summer, did we, Ruth?
There's no need. Okay, we're going to Dottie, preaching from a treetop.
My great-uncle John Wilcox, he went to the Primitive Baptist Church, and he got saved, got religion. So he began reading the Bible constantly. One day he went down to Albert Hill's store. He didn't say a word. He walked in and he laid the Bible on the counter and just started reading out loud. Not when he didn't say a word again to anybody, just kept reading. When he got through reading the passage he wanted to, he closed the Bible up and left. Well, Cal Tipton was in the store also, and he went to the door to see which way John went. There was 2 trails to the Wilcox place, an upper trail and a lower trail. And John took the upper trail, and Cal Wilcox took the lower trail. He ran ahead of John and climbed up in his high tree. And when he saw John coming down the trail, he leaned back and he yelled, "John, this is the Lord. I'm calling you to preach." "John, this is the Lord. I'm calling you to preach." I never did know if he preached any or not.
Okay, we've got one on, I'll try to tell this one a bit. Might need your help, Lois Kay. A lot of funny things went on at church. But here's the deal. When you're a towhead, you can't laugh about them. Your mama call you down. You couldn't even laugh about them going home. But we can laugh about them now. So we have our own version at the Missionary Baptist Church of the day the squirrel went berserk in the first self-righteous church in the sleepy little town of Pascagoula. We had, to set the stage here a little bit, we had, sometimes we had a lot of preachers lined up to preach. And of course, each one of them that got up bless her heart, they were only going to speak a word. And an hour later, the next one was doing the same thing. So it's rough on us kids. But one time, one of them got things so inspired that there was a guy jumped up shouting and running around on benches. And the back door of the Missionary Baptist Church is not in view really of the pulpit. If you're standing up at the podium, you really don't see much about what's going on at the back door. Well, there's a wasp nest over there in the back door. This guy got stirred up, and the wasp got after him. And so guess what he did? He was doing more, as our mother called it, K-rolling. He really got with it when the wasp got onto him. And we're back there, like this. And preacher's sensing this guy doing this, and he's kind of feeding on that. So he's really pouring it on. Finally, the guy got away from the wasp nest, and things got settled down. But it was funny, but there's no way we could even laugh about it then, right, Lois Kay? Okay, we're leaving church, and we're going to the Tennessee Theater with Dottie, and this is called Taking Over the Tennessee Theater.
My daddy and Uncle Floyd decided one day they'd go fishing. Before they went fishing, though, they went by the ramp patch, and they picked a whole big bag of ramps. Ramps are little slight green-looking onions, except they are very potent. They'll stay in your body for at least 3 weeks or so. So anyhow, they went on fishing, so they caught these fish, and they fried up the fish and the ramps together, and they devoured all of what they had cooked. And they caught more fish and took the fish home and the ramps to their mother, and they fixed ramps and fish for supper. So the next day, my daddy and Uncle Floyd decided they had planned on going to the movies. Well, they wanted to go to the Tennessee Theater on Gay Street in Knoxville. They said when they got to the theater, they got their tickets and they went in, and the theater was crowded with people. So the only seats available was way down front. So they got down there, and he said they were so enjoying that movie till intermission time. And he turned around and looked, and he said the only people left in that theater was on the back row. If you've ever ate ramps, they're terrible smelling.
But they're good for you. All right, Dottie, chicken and egg payments.
My grandparents, Dan Lane and Conzada Baines Lane, lived on Rich Gap Mountain. They first moved out of Cades Cove into Indian Gap and then to Rich Gap Mountain. And that was the only road into Cades Cove, Rich Gap Road, or Old Cades Cove Road, they called it. That was before they built the road into Cades Cove now. That was a railroad bed. So the peddlers had to go in and out this road. And one day this peddler stopped at my grandparents' house, and they had very little money at that time. And he was trying to sell her this 1921 Singer sewing machine. And my grandmother was a good barter. She made a contract with him. So she bought the sewing machine for 4 dozen of eggs and 3 chickens every Friday. He would come by and pick those chickens and eggs up for that sewing machine. I don't know how long that contract lasted, but we still have that old sewing machine.
And next door to you, Judy, a pig ringer. If you know what a pig ringer is, hold your hand up. Ellen knows. Leon? Okay.
Well, pigs are notorious at digging, and I started to say something like they do now when they put those rings in their nose, but with a pig, it just looks like a big staple, and put it in their nose and they don't dig. So we would always ring the pigs. We were down at the Noah Birchfield house, and I wanted to be a boy so bad. I mean, Ricky got to do everything. He was older, and I wanted to be a boy. So everything he did, I'd fight to get to do it too. But on that day, we were going to ring the pig. So we were on to Daddy, and Poppy Myers was there too. And they finally give us all jobs. So Ricky and Daddy were down and Poppy were down in the pen, and me and Bonnie were up in the manger. So Bonnie had the ringers, had the staples. I had the ringer, and I would put the ring into the staple thing, and then I was going to hand it down. Daddy and Poppy would hold the pig, and Ricky got to snap its nose. So we're all down there, and it's just great, and their pig's running round and round and round in a circle, and Daddy and Poppy grabbed that first pig by the back leg, and that thing was jumping and squealing, and they screamed just horrible, and all the pigs started screaming. Everything started running. Bonnie started screaming. I started screaming. I threw down the ringers, and we didn't ring a pig.
And let's change from pigs to goats. The trip of your lifetime.
We were back up at the Gregory house, and I think I was probably 5, and I have ulcers still to this day, and have had since I was born. And we had goats because I could tolerate goat's milk. So Mama said she was ashamed to change my diaper because when you did that, it smelled just like a goat. But independent of that, Ricky always had everything. Ricky had this little pedal tractor. And he talked me into thinking it was my idea. And I got on the goat, and he tied my feet to the pedals, and he tied my hands to the handlebar, and he took a switch, and he warped that goat. And it took off down over the hill. We got down to the barbed wire fence. The goat got caught in it. His horns did. And I was on the ground, and the tractor was going round and round. The goat was jumping, and Poppy was running after screaming, and Ricky was laughing. And the goat finally got loose. It got halfway out to Tater Branch on top of the hill, and Poppy caught up with us. And if you've ever been whipped with a belt, the worst part of it is hearing it pop. So Ricky's standing there laughing, and Poppy takes his belt off, and the way you take it off, it just snaps. And I thought, hot dog. He wore Ricky out, and I loved it. So the goat ride was worth it.
Lois Kay, Commodore's banjo.
Well, we had this man that I think Daddy had gotten him out of jail. He was staying at our house for a while, and he had a banjo that he played. Well, we had this brother, a little older than me, but he was mentally challenged, and he was very quiet. He could talk, but he didn't talk. He didn't have anything he wanted to say. And so he and this man's name was Commodore Tipton, and we called him Commie. So one day, he and Commie would get out and do things together. Commie would take him to the mountains with him, and he was just friends with Luke, our brother. So Commie had a banjo that he played at night when we'd all be, after we'd eaten supper, we'd be sitting around, and Commie would get his banjo out and play it. And so one day, he was out of the house, and one of our brothers, Leland, who's not here today, but he decided he'd try out Commie's banjo. And so he got it down. Well, he broke a string. So he knew he's in trouble. So all us younger ones, there were 5 of us, I guess, younger than Leland, and Luke was next to Leland, but he made us promise, don't tell who did this. He'll just think it just broke. So he got it that night. After we'd had supper and Commie got his banjo down, he said, well, somebody's broke my string. And we were all just quiet as a mouse. Nobody was going to say anything. And our brother Luke, who, remember I told you he never talked, he looked up and he said, Leland done it.
And Boop and Pearl spending the night.
Okay, one night, there was this other Sparks family that used to come to our house, and they probably had as many children as our family did. And so they were there one night, and of course, there wasn't enough beds, so the men were going to sleep in the barn, and the women and children, I guess the girls at least, were sleeping in the in the house. And there was this car came along at the road and stopped, and you didn't have traffic in Cades Cove in the middle of the night unless there was something going on. So they appeared to be drunk. And I don't know if they were or not, but we thought they were. Okay, Larry says they were drunk. So my mother and the other lady, whose name was Pearl, they got scared that the men were in the barn, so we had no protection. So my mother went out and got the axe, and she said she'd take care of us. But in the meantime, the men woke up and found out that what was going on, and they came, and I think Larry said it wasn't. I didn't remember what happened, but Larry said that they had car trouble or were in a ditch, I believe, and they got them on their way. But Lucy said she asked her mother, said, well, you weren't going to hit them with that axe, were you? She said, I was if they come through that door.
Yeah, well, to help you out a little bit, Mommy and Pearl sent some girls out the back door to the barn to summon help. And so they came and said, there's trouble at the house. Daddy didn't have any guns in the barn, so he and Boop and some of the older ones, they made us little ones stay behind. They took pitchforks and went charging toward the barn, or the house, and they scared the drunks sober. So anyway, it was the drunks were glad to get pulled out of the ditch and get back on their way. Okay, Lois Kay, we got you on the airplane hitting the house.
Okay, this is another time when we had company, and it was our Aunt Frankie and her husband and one daughter, I think. And when we had company, if you didn't use the barn, you had to switch beds around. You know, you say, well, our mother say, you sleep with so-and-so, and they can have your bed, and somebody else sleep there. And so we were all turned around in different beds, and, you know, when you wake up at night and you're in the wrong bed, things are confusing for a little while. Well, that night we'd all gone to bed and everybody got to sleep. All of a sudden we heard this big noise, just a big crash, and my mother jumped out of bed and she said, Lord of mercy, airplanes hit this house. So it turned out that we had this upstairs where the boys all slept up there, but there was no rail around the stairwell. And so Larry had got up, probably confused. He may have been in the wrong bed too. And he walked off the edge of the stairs, and he had fallen and all the way down the stairs and made the big noise. And of course, it wasn't funny then, except the airplane part, but it's funny now.
It's not funny now. And Ruth, Mama's first picnic.
That was my mother. And of course, like other families, you know, they worked all week. And on Sunday, they went to church and rested Sunday afternoon. Well, they had one of my grandma's sisters had come over, and so they had the idea that when they got home from church, they were going to go on a picnic. So they had all their food all packed up, and Mama was so excited. She'd never been on a picnic before, and so the sister had a car the one that'd come to visit. So they packed the picnic in the trunk of the car, and they went over the mountain. And they'd been working on the road that went from Cades Cove out Laurel Creek. And before that, you know, they went and came the Rich Mountain Road into Dry Valley. So they decided they'd go over there, and the men were going to check out this equipment that was being used on the road and building bridges and so forth. And they wanted to check that out. And so when they took the car and went up over the mountain and down on the other side and parked it, the men went off to check out the equipment, and the women were going to set the food out. They got it all set out, and the men weren't back yet, and all of a sudden it came one of those spring thunderstorms, and it rained really hard. They had to grab up all the food, throw it back in the car, and wait on the men to get back, and then they drove back home and had their picnic at home when they got back over the hill.
And while we're on you, Daddy's cow ride.
my dad had two brothers that were both younger than him. And some of the things, you know, they didn't have toys, and of course they were teenagers at this time anyway, but and I'm sure you all have heard the stories about one of their big fun things to do was go up on the mountain and wait for somebody to come through down below and roll a rock off over the hill to watch them run whenever the rock got close to them. Well, they decided, it was late in the fall, and Daddy was going to ride this cow. Well, his brother, the younger brother, held the cow's head till Daddy got on her. It was a milk cow, so she's fairly tame. Well, they weren't watching the middle brother. He'd gone over and pulled up a corn stalk that was still there. And whenever Jay turned loose of the cow's head, Daddy was going to ride, and he just had hold of her around the neck, kind of leaning forward. But when Joe poked that cow from the backside with that corn stalk, she threw him off, and he got a broken arm from his fun.
We're going to you, Bernard, with my recycling mother.
Mom was, she was a wizard at recycling. We had a wind-up phonograph, record player, and someone wound the spring too tight and it busted. And the thing sat around there for a year or so, and Mom, one day, she folded that thing up and took a saw and sawed the top off. Well, she removed all of the mechanical part of the record player, and she reconditioned the top part so it would fit back on. And just right then, she had a nightstand that really worked well. Also, someone at Christmas had gave her a real fancy tablecloth. Now, Mom was an old-fashioned person, and she liked the old tablecloths. I think they call it oilcloth. You know, you just take a dishcloth and wipe it off, and it was clean. And she didn't have any use for a lace tablecloth. But she got to looking at one of her windows. It was in the kitchen, I think. And she repurposed this tablecloth, split it down the middle and hemmed it and put hangers on it, and she put it up and used it for a curtain. Worked out real well.
And don't forget the crow with a banner.
Oh, with the last year or so we lived in the Cove, it became almost impossible to have a garden or grow field corn, for that matter. And you could have 2 cats and 1 dog if you tied the dog up at night. That was the rules. But Dad would supplement that a little bit with steel traps, and he would position these traps around here and there, and he caught a crow one time, and he brought that thing to the house and had Mom sew about a 24-inch piece of white cloth to its tail feathers. She sewed it with a sewing machine. And we turned that crow loose, and you could see him diddy-bopping around over the cove with all the other crows dive-bombing him. They didn't understand the white cloth.
You could have, 2 cats and 1 dog?
2 cats and 1 dog. Ranger Smith, let me throw this in. He was a good guy. He was a decent sort of fella, and he wanted to get along with the people. And we would tie our dog up, but somehow or other that rascal would always get loose. And Mr. Smith would always make a last lap just after, shortly before dark, and he'd have his headlights on, and our dog would be chasing him, leaping up at the headlights. Mr. Smith never said anything to us about that.
Everybody knows that it's nighttime when you tie your dog up. That's because that's when they eat the bears during the night.
Oh, I got another good one. We could cut the only green tree that we could cut for firewood, and we depended on the fireplace for heat. The only tree you could cut was a wild cherry. And the question arises, what do bears eat in the summertime, wild cherries. So it didn't make a whole lot of sense.
Got two more dog stories on family funnies here. We've got an older sister, Linus, that's not here, but she, her husband worked for the Park Service, and they were in Maggie Valley, North Carolina. So occasionally, when she would come and stay a few days, she had a little dog that was really foreign to us. It was a little Chihuahua. Our dogs were mainly hounds or mutts, and so we weren't used to a Chihuahua. Oscar was his name, and when we would just take off across the cove with our dogs and doing various things, and if they would see a groundhog, most time they knew where its hole was, and they'd try to beat it to the hole. Sometimes did. But on one occasion, little Oscar, he was trying to be a big dog and do what a dog should do. And he was a house dog at Linus's. So when they got to the hole, Oscar didn't hold up. He went right in the hole. So we heard some carrying on, you could say, down in the hole. After a little while, Oscar, we were looking at the hole, and here Oscar shot up just like a rocket. And when Linus came, he had a few little marks on him. When Linus came, we had some tall explaining to do, and she didn't go for Oscar out living a dog life. Another one we had an old cow called Nubhorn. She was the boss cow, and she was the one that organized them, I'm sure. If the bear came in them, cows all got in a tight wad. Nubhorn was the organizer, and she had the first calf every year. If another cow had a calf before she didn't like it. And she was a dog roller. If you know what a dog roller cow is, walk in the field sometime with one of those with your dog, with a dog roller cow in there. Well, Buster Cable was our first cousin that was born and raised in the Cove, and lots of times Buster would come over there on Sunday afternoons, and his favorite thing was to go check the cows with us. So he wore overalls, and he put his thumbs in the galluses, and he took big long strides, about 4 feet, when he'd step. But Buster, he knew about Nubhorn and the dogs, and when we would head out across the field, Buster, he is a big, long, lanky guy, and he would look around. He'd say, and dogs be with us, he'd say, "Where's old Nubhorn at?" He'd witnessed her in action a few times. While we got Bernard going here, there's a lot of characters in Cades Cove. Days of old, we had characters. Smoke Sam Birchfield. Most of these are our granddaddies or close to it. Smoke Sam Birchfield, Long Hair Sam Birchfield, Chicken Eater John Tipton, Fed Shields. He killed a panther with a hunting knife, defending one of his young colts. Fighting Billy Tipton, of course, is our granddaddy, and Judy's, Bernard's, he and his brother Thomas were the first to get land grants in the Cades Cove. Following they were warriors. They were from the Revolution and War of 1812. But anyway, in our day, these guys had all gone on, but we had one guy that's an uncle to Judy and Bernard, Vernon Myers. And he's hard to explain, hard to describe, isn't he, Bernard?
He sure is.
But I want you to tell him the story when he had a night out on the town, if you will, with the boys, and came home one night.
Uncle Sherman, the best way to describe him was that he was a character for sure. He was about 6'3" and weighed about 240. He was much of a man. He and his wife never had any children, and they both dearly loved children. And like Larry said, occasionally he would go out for a night on the town. But he had certain precautions that he took. He'd always make sure the door hinges were oiled so the door wouldn't squeak when he come back. But one night now this was back when the old days, back then when you were heating with a fireplace, most people had 2 beds in the living room. It was a common thing. And he and Parley had their bed in the living room. And he came in one night, crept in just as quiet as a mouse, and thought he had it made. And he was headed for the fireplace, going to warm a bit. It had burned down to where it's just a bed of coals, but there was an old cat laying there, and he stepped on that cat's tail. And you can imagine. And Parley, that was his wife, she raised up in the bed and said, "What's going on? What time is it?" And Sherman said, "I guess it's about 9 o'clock." Well, the old clock on the mantel started bong, bong, bong. And it bonged till it bonged 12 times. And Parley was giving him a real going over, and he started crying. She said, "Well, what's wrong with you now?" He said, "Here we've been married all these years, and you'll believe an old wore-out clock before you'll believe me."
Thank you. And Lucy, we're going to talk about blowing up a pressure cooker.
Oh, my mother had this pressure cooker. It was about a gallon or 2 gallon size one, and she would cook in that a lot if she wanted to get something done fast. So one day Daddy had gone to the town and she said, "If y'all will catch me that guinea," said, "I'll cook that and we'll go down to the creek and have a picnic." So we got the guinea and she got it cleaned up and put it in that pressure cooker. And she got the fire a little too hot and the cooker got too hot, so it blew up. And there was guinea on the ceiling, on the walls, there was on the floor, there was guinea everywhere. So we didn't get to go on the picnic. We had to clean up the guinea.
And we think in 1960 when we left, part of that guinea was still on the ceiling. And Laverne, oh, wait a minute, Lucy. This is about Laverne. Blackberry picking with Laverne.
Laverne hated to pick blackberries. She dearly hated it, and she was afraid of snakes. She wouldn't go anywhere she thought there might be a snake. Scared of bears. We never did see a bear, but she thought she would. And so one day we were picking, and our older sister, Linus, was always with us, and she was the boss. She made us stay till we filled our buckets, no matter what. So Laverne found a plum tree, and she filled the bottom of her bucket with plums, and then she put berries on the top, and she told Linus that she was ready to go to the house, that she had her bucket full. So she let her go, and when our mother emptied that bucket, there was all those plums.
Oh, now Laverne, it's your time. Chasing Lucy with a sitting hen.
When a hen would be sitting in the chicken house, we'd put eggs under it and mark them so we'd know that'd be the ones that hatch out. Every day we'd have to go and pick that hen up and check and see if there's any fresh eggs under. Well, Lucy hated to do that. She said it might peck me. So I'd have to get the chicken and pick it up and look for the eggs, and I found out she was scared of them, so when we'd get in a fight or get an agreement, I'd go to the chicken house and get an old setting hen and throw it on Lucy. She'd take off toward the house just flying, "Mommy, Mommy!"
Now, she was she was she was afraid of a sitting hen, but not afraid of bears and snakes, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Dottie, a Rich Mountain whiskey run.
My grandfather made whiskey, but in order to have whiskey, you have to have a water supply. So he would put a pipe in a creek, and it would run to the still. But meanwhile, the federal government had hired people to walk the banks to see if they could find those pipes to go to the stills. And he would get mad and he'd say, well, it's just them old bank walkers. But anyhow, my daddy and Uncle Floyd were getting ready to make a whiskey run. They would take it to Knoxville. He had an old 1932 B model Ford, and they loaded the back of that old car down with whiskey. And they had to go out Rich Gap Mountain Road. Well, when they left, the deputies had backed up where they couldn't be seen. So when they passed them, the deputies took after them. Well, my daddy had souped up that old 32 B model, and they were going around them crooked roads around Rich Gap Mountain. He come this huge S-curve. He and Uncle Floyd got out and threw all that whiskey up on the bank and stood and waited till the deputies caught up with them. Well, the deputies pulled in, they run and jumped and opened the car door, and there's nothing in there. Well, they was standing and talking to them, and one of the jars of whiskey come rolling down from the bank. My father and my Uncle Floyd denied any knowledge of the whiskey, but because it was not in their possession, they couldn't arrest them. They got away that time.
Okay, we're going to Snake Tales. Oh, did you get it?
Pardon?
You done with the whiskey run?
Right. Yep.
Okay, sorry. Snake Tales, we've got some snake tales, but there's a lot of snake tales we can't even tell here today because it didn't end well for the snake. But Ruth, what about Kermit's night in the hospital? And you can say it.
Well, my younger sister had gotten bit by a copperhead on the end of her big toe the day before she was supposed to start to school, so she got out of going to school one day anyway. But years later, my dad, and he was, I guess, early 80s, and he went up to get some wood off of the stack, and he said he probably just stuck his finger right in that snake's mouth, because where he put his finger, the snake just came straight out and bit him. And I think Mom took him to the hospital, and he wanted to be treated and sent home. He didn't want to spend the night there. And he kept trying to get them to send him home that night. They wouldn't. The next morning, and you know, if you've ever been in the hospital, you know how long it takes to get dismissed once you're in there. Well, he kept telling the doctor first thing that morning, he said, I've got to go home. And the doctor just kind of ignored him. And he said, you don't understand. He said, it's whatever, April the whatever, you know. And he said, I've got to get home and get my garden out. And when the doctor left, he got Mom, he said, Lois, go over to the co-op and get me some cabbage plants. And so she left and went and got the cabbage plants and came back, and he was still there in bed. And then he got on to the head nurse. He called them in and her in, and he said, you don't understand. He said, I've got to get out of here. And she looked at him like, you know, she thought he was crazy. And he said, I've got to get home, get my garden out. You know, if his garden wasn't out the day he planted somewhat by the signs, if the plants weren't in the garden by that day, he thought it was bad luck or something. But he used that a lot to get out of doing something or to try to make something happen.
Plus, he was looking for something when he got back over there, wasn't he?
Oh, well, I didn't tell that part, did I? Yeah, he told, he didn't tell us because he's afraid we'd tell it. You know, he was really kind of quiet-mouthed about some things, but he said he was going to get over there and find that blankety-blank snake. He was going to take care of it.
And Grandpa Schuler protecting the family?
My mother's parents, of course, had lived there in Cades Cove as well. And one Sunday afternoon, they had walked from their house over to my grandma's parents' house, the Anthony's, on the other side of the cove. And they'd stayed till almost dark. And when they got back to their house, which was probably about 1.5 miles away, when they opened the door to go in the house, Grandpa saw a snake laying there on the floor. And he was going to protect his family from that snake. So he took 3 or 4 steps in real quickly and jumped on what he thought was the head of that snake. And Grandma got to looking, and she said that she thought his tail was acting kind of funny. But he'd jumped on the tail of the snake, and it was striking his overalls. They got it straightened out and took care of him.
And another one on Dottie. This was my home first.
We were having a Gregor reunion in Cades Cove, and there was some huge rocks where the children were playing, and a rattlesnake come out from under the rock where the kids were. My daddy went over, and he picked up a stick, and he killed that snake. Happened so a young ranger walked up then and said, "Mr. Gregory, you know you can't kill a snake in the park. This was his home." My daddy didn't even bat an eye, and he looked at that ranger and said, "Young man, this was my home before it was that snake's home."
And another snake story we have is back on Commodore that stayed with us. He would do little piddly jobs for Daddy. But Commodore was, he'd get in jail for ginseng in the mountains. Of course, Daddy'd get him out of jail, put the fox right back in the hen house, you know. So we didn't know what Commodore would do, but he'd disappear for a week or two in the mountains. And he carried everything he needed in a lard bucket, 5-gallon lard cans. I mean, everything he needed, he had in that lard can. One time he came in after he's gone several days, and he had that lard can with him and had a big rattlesnake in the bottom of it. And he would get us kids up there looking at it, and he'd tilt the lid over a little bit and flip the side of that can and get that thing rattling. And we don't know, I don't know what happened to it, I could imagine, but that's Commodore's rattlesnake. We're going to outhouses. And Ruth has a story about a belt in an outhouse.
Yeah, everybody in the cove had outhouses. No one had a bathroom. Until I left to go to college, and when I came home one weekend, Mom and Dad put in a bathroom. But prior to that, it was go around the hill, and our toilet never had a door on it. I was thinking about that on the way up here this morning. Everybody else had a door on their toilet, but ours kind of faced up the hill and away from the house and away from the traffic around the cove, so I guess they thought there was no need of putting a door on it. But that would have been nice in the wintertime when it snowed and all that. But when we'd get up in the morning going to school, the first, I guess whether we're going to school or not, our first thing we do is run out the door and around the hill. And one morning it was just barely daylight, and Kay had gotten up and ran up there, and she came back, and she was a little bit scared. She's kind of scared of things, Laverne. Does that sound familiar? And she told Mom, she said, "What's that belt laying on the toilet, right beside the seat?" And, of course, my mother's deathly afraid of snakes. So she went running up there, and sure enough, it was a snake laying right beside the seat in the toilet.
And Kay's not here to tell about that, is she?
No.
And winter trips to the outhouse.
Well, yep, that's when you went a little earlier than you'd planned on going and had time to brush the snow off from around the seats, and it was not very comfortable. And I was thinking too on the way up here this morning, thank goodness Daddy had bees because if he cut the comb out of the frame to put comb in the honey that he packed, then he had to replace that with foundation made from beeswax. And in between the sheets of foundation was this sheet of almost tissue like paper. And we were always glad in the wintertime, because that was our Christmas break from school project, was to replace all the foundation in those frames. And we always had good toilet paper during that time.
And our feature toilet outhouse story is, of course, Uncle Sherman Myers. And Bernard, what about Uncle Sherman going to the outhouse?
This was back when the CC's, civilian conservation guys were in Cades Cove. And each morning they would be in a truck going out to the work site wherever they were going. And Uncle Sherman he was an early riser, and he would drink coffee, black, strong coffee, till daylight, and then it was time to go to work. And sometimes that will act as a laxative, you know. So one morning, Uncle Sherman was going toward the outhouse at a brisk pace, and a load of the CC guys were coming by in a truck. And you know how young men, especially those from New York and New Jersey, they hollered and hooped and said, "Hurry, hurry, you ain't gonna make it." Well, the next morning, Uncle Sherman was standing out in the road with a 12-gauge shotgun cradled in his arms, and he said, "From now on, you fellas come through here, you say hello, Sherman, or good morning, Mr. Myers," but said, "You're not going to make fun of me anymore." But he didn't.
It's good to have understandings. Okay, we're going to talk about some real ghost stories. We're talking real ghosts here now. So, Lois Kay, the hog or alligator story.
Well, Larry and Layman, that's Larry over here, of course, and Layman is younger than Larry, and then I was the next older than Larry. We used to get out and just roam around a lot. That's how we played, I guess. We run around the fields and woods. And so one day we came upon the Oliver house. It was on the property that we leased, so, you know, that's where we mostly stayed, was on what we considered our property. And there weren't that many tourists around then, so we were the only ones there, no tourists, just us. And we peeped around through the house, and Daddy had always warned us to watch out for snakes, that they could be laying around the sills of those houses. And he said, "You kids need to be careful when you're out wandering around." Well, that day we peeped through the house, and just kind of scary anyway, and you went from one side to the other and out, and there was a building out there. I guess it was considered a garage or a woodshed or something. It was enclosed on three sides, so with one part of one side open, and one corner was dark in there. So we peeped in there, and we saw something long and black, and it scared us to death. Larry says we thought it was a wild hog, but in my memory, we thought it was an alligator. And we ran all the way home and, of course, reported what we'd found. And so Daddy got concerned, and he and Leslie and Leland went up there to see what we had found. And they found an old black car fender.
Probably left by your Olivers up there. Okay, Lucy, it's getting better. There's a body in this casket.
There was this old house kind of on the backside of the cove from where we lived, and this man that used to live there was named Whit Shields, and he had made coffins in his day, and when he moved, he'd left some in the house. So we thought it was a big deal to walk through the fields, probably 2 miles or more, to go see those coffins. So one day, some girl had spent the night with us, so we decided to take her to see the coffins. So my older sister, Lennis, she was pretty brave. She'd tackle anything. So she slipped around and got ahead of us and got in one of those coffins. and probably didn't look for a snake or nothing, and she pulled the lid down, and we all got there. There's probably 6 or 8 of us, and we all got there, and we were looking around at those coffins, and we got right up to her. She raised up and screamed, and so we all ran away out in the field before we ever stopped.
That's Linus. Judy with Charlie Myers' ghost.
Bernard's father, Goldman, and Uncle Sherman, and my grandfather, Charlie, were brothers. And it's obvious Sherman was around her, but my grandfather wasn't far behind him. He just wasn't as boisterous, and poor Goldman had to bail him out of jail and take care of him. So my grandfather told 2 ghost stories, and I'm not sure if he was drinking the first time he saw these ghosts, but years later, he was sober as a judge when he told me. But when you leave the Primitive Baptist Church and you start toward the Methodist Church, down on the left, just as you come out of the woods, there was a house down along the edge of the woods, and there was a man who would come home drinking at night, and they had a young baby, and they came home. He came home, baby was crying, and he put the baby between his knees, and he killed the baby. And my grandfather, we would stop there and we'd listen for that baby to cry, and he said he had heard it. He also, from the Primitive Baptist Church down to Hyatt Lane, there would be an angel that would jump on the back of your horse and it would ride with you, wouldn't say anything. Methodist Church down to Hyatt Lane. And when you got to Hyatt Lane, she would get off and wouldn't say anything. But I'm sure the first time he was drinking and Goldman was bailing him out when he heard those ghosts.
Thank you. And Buster Cable that I told you about a while ago, our first cousin, born in 1914. Buster died a few years ago at 95. But Buster, before he died, some of his sister's grandchildren was taking him around the cove doing a video to get some Cades Cove stories. And so they passed the back of Sparks Lane in the loop road. Buster pointed out where somebody had seen a haint in that area in his lifetime, and he was raised real close to there. And they were pressing Buster on to describe his haint. And what kind of haint was this? And, was it white? Was it this? Buster said, it's just a plain old haint. So another one is the ghost in the cemetery. Back in our dad's day, he was born in 1898. In the teens, he and some of his cousins, John and France and various other Sparks cousins, they would go to, he called it meetings. It's church revivals mostly, and various things that's going on in the cove. Well, they were walking back up the cove and past the Methodist church one time, 3 of them, and they saw something. One of them saw something white bobbing up in the cemetery. And so finally he got the nerve to tell the others he really saw something white bobbing up in the cemetery. And the other one looked, and finally they all looked, and sure enough, they all agreed there was something among the tombstones that's going up and down that was white. So, of course, they all ran home back to Sparks Lane. And they told their dad, our granddaddy, John Thomas, and the next day he took them down there in a horse and wagon to try to make sense of this. And someone had there was a freshly dug grave there, and a white goat had fallen in that grave, and he was trying to jump out. So that's one of Daddy's favorite ghost stories. Another one that Leon helped me with, our oldest brother Leon. Raise your hand, Leon. I didn't introduce you. This is our oldest brother Leon. He's number 1 of the 12. And Leon had told me that Uncle Dan Myers he ran logging camps. He's the granddaddy of these two young ladies sitting right behind Leon. And Uncle Dan, his quarters, if you know anything about logging camps, they're very temporary. Everything about them is temporary. You build your house out of slabs, you build a cafeteria out of slabs, and all this kind of stuff. So they had a bunkhouse apparently where they had several loggers staying, lumberjacks, and there was a guy in there they were pretty much bullying him around, I guess, picking on him. So he would go report to Uncle Dan. He and Aunt Ivy stayed in another quarters from the bunkhouse. So he had been one night to tell Uncle Dan the guys were aggravating him again and telling him ghost stories. So Uncle Dan told him, he said, you don't have to put up with that. Just take action, basically. Open a can or whatever. And so this guy, he was satisfied, and he was walking home from back to the bunkhouse from Uncle Dan's, and one of these guys that was messing with him had got a sheet and put over him, and was sitting on a rail fence as the guy was walking by. So the guy took a creek rock and knocked this guy out with that rock. He threw that rock and knocked the guy off of the rail fence. That ended the messing with him, I guess. Okay, we're going to go to Bears on the Loose, and Lois Kay has one on the Banny House apples.
Okay, this is probably the same summer that we saw the ghost at the John Oliver cabin, but I was probably about 9, and Larry and Layman would have been 7 and 5, or 7 and 6 if I was 9. And we were out, we'd had a storm. It was a summer afternoon, and there'd been a storm. And her mother said, if you kids will go up there to the Baney place and pick up those apples and put them in a sack, then when the older boys come home, they can go up there and haul them home in a truck. So we went up to pick them up because the storm had beat them off, and we got up there and we picked all the apples up, and there was a little smokehouse there, so we set them inside the smokehouse so the boys could come and get them. Well, while it started raining, and we got in there too. So while we were in there, we had the dogs with us outside, of course. We heard the dogs start barking. They were just really, really barking. I believe somebody told me, I called it treed before, but it's bayed. But there was we went out and looked out to see what they were barking at. And it was a bear sitting in the middle of a briar patch, just out from where we were. And the dogs were out there, as somebody told me, they had the bear bayed, not treed, because he wasn't in a tree. But we ran all the way home and told our story again. And because we'd had the incidents at the Oliver cabin, they kind of doubted us. They thought, yeah, they think they've seen a bear this time. So they had to go up and get the apples anyway. So they went up to get the apples, and they could see where the bear had been sitting in the middle of a blackberry patch, and the dogs had left a trail around where they had been barking at it and circling it.
The bear couldn't have caught us anyway. Dottie, watching the bear eat your breakfast.
When we moved out of Cades Cove, we always came back every weekend. My daddy, this was his home, so he came back every weekend. But we'd camp out, or we'd stay, or occasionally we'd go over to AC and Amy Sparks' house and stay. But this time we had camped out at the old campground. The campground didn't look like it does now. It was just trees, and there was a flat place up near the gate, and that's where the old Spruce Flats School was. So again, we had the old 32B model, and Daddy and Mama would sleep in under it, and the kids would sleep in the B model. Daddy got up early that morning and went fishing. So Mama got up and started breakfast, and when she was out there frying up that bacon, you talk about it smelling so good. And she looked up and saw this bear coming down the trail, and she screamed and hollered, "Kids, run for the car." and we all run and got in the car. The bear came down to the old car and reared up on his hind legs, and he was swatting the windows. You could see them big claws on him. We were really scared, but he soon tired of that and went over to where Mother was fixing breakfast, and he ate all of our food and all of our breakfast and everything before he left. I know we weren't supposed to feed the bears, but he fed himself.
The bear didn't get our apples.
It didn't? Okay.
We're going to finish up with dealing with tourist odd questions. And I want to qualify this a little bit. We did get some really odd questions. Occasionally, we think most of those came from people raised on concrete. So I found out when I started traveling around the country, though, there's poor people in about every state living about like we live. And my parents really made a lot of friends, and other parents in the Cove made a lot of friends with long-lasting friends. Our mother, until she died, she had ladies that she had written all over the country, exchanged letters and so forth. But we did have some funny things that happened. And Lois Kay, we'll start with stopping cars with a bicycle.
Oh, okay. This is about Larry and Layman again. And most of you probably don't know that Larry is retired from law enforcement. And I think this is how his law experience began, his career. Larry and Layman had this bike, and they somewhere they had gotten this siren to go on it. And they found out that the faster the bike went, the louder the siren went. So they went around the house, I guess so Daddy and Mom wouldn't know what they were doing, but they went around where there was a hill that, I guess you call that a switchback curve, where they could go up and come down that hill, and cars, the tourists would be coming around through there. And so they got to noticing that when they'd come down through there, the cars would be stopped. And they thought, or the people in the cars thought they were being arrested or going to get a ticket or something. But I think that's how Larry got started in law enforcement.
It did make it convenient for when we'd come off
May
this
I have
hill.
your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? We'd like to remind everybody of our Appalachian Homecoming later this afternoon, starting at 6 p.m. at Patriot Park. All the activities are free. If you want to eat, you must purchase a ticket from the Cades Cove Preservation Society at their booth in the vendor hall. The tickets are $20 each. If you want to eat, you purchase them from them. But there's a lot of activities going on at Patriot Park. There'll be entertainment, storytelling, Elizabeth Rose, Sam Venable, Bill Landry. A lot of activities going on there, music. So see the folks at the Cades Cove Association at their booth in the vendor hall to get those tickets. Thank you.
Incidentally, we're having our own Appalachian Homecoming in here right now. And we have, I was going to say it's convenient. We really started out, we didn't mean to be pulling cars over, but it's kind of nice when they were all pulled over to the side and we could just buzz on by when after we came down the hill. So I'll have to say we tried that another time or two. We're going to a German's question, Ruth, speaking with your dad. A German's question.
We'd been to the garden one morning gathering vegetables for the day's meals, and had just gotten back in down at my grandmother's. And there was a car pulled in the front yard there, and the couple, they couldn't speak English. And they kept asking my grandma for Corin. And she'd look at them and just kind of, shake her head like she didn't know what they were saying, and kept saying Corin. And she couldn't understand anything else he was saying either. So finally, he took both hands, put one on each side of his mouth, and started chewing like he was gnawing down an ear of corn. That's the only way she knew what he was talking about.
And the lady that wanted the turnips.
my dad always grew a big garden, and he loved greens, so he'd have a spring green patch and a fall green patch. Well, one spring he had an especially good crop of turnips, and this lady, he knew the family, and she came and asked him if she could have some turnip greens, and he said, yes. He said, you can have turnip greens and turnips too. He said, just help yourself. Just be sure you don't get my big turnip. Well, she'd been gone out to the garden for a little while, and Mom said, she turned to Daddy and said, well, you know what she's going to do. He said, yeah, I'm just letting her have time to get to it. So he got up and put his shoes on and went out there, and sure enough, she had her bag of turnip greens sitting there. But she was just pulling that big turnip out of the ground when he got there. And it was a big one too. And he said, hey, you told me you wouldn't get that. And she said, well, what are you going to do with it? And she used some nice language. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, I didn't grow it for you to do that with it. You can fill in the blanks.
Oh, Dottie, Little Mountain Children.
We would usually go to our grandparents, Dan and Kenzada Lane, that lived up on Rich Gap Mountain. About after we left the Cove, we'd go across Rich Gap Mountain and stop, and then my Aunt Lou also lived there. And when we'd go in, she had several children, and then we had several. So whenever we'd go in the house, my mother and Aunt Lou would say, all right, kids, get out and go play, but don't go near Bull's Cave. Well, Bull's Cave is one of the most dangerous caves in East Tennessee. And there's no signs telling you where it is until you get about 100 yards from it. So that would be the first place we would go to play. We would play in the first room. Was a huge room, but little did we know at the back was a 250-foot drop. But anyhow, after we played there a good while, we'd go out, we'd start picking wildflowers, wild geraniums, iris, Solomon seals, trilliums, Indian paintbrush, a lot of those beautiful wildflowers. And then we'd go up to the road, and what we'd do at the road, we would slide down the banks on the dirt. And we had a lot of fun doing that. And you imagine how dirty we were. But the tourists always come through that road, and we knew that. So they would jump out of their car and come up and say, oh, let's make pictures of the little mountain children. But there was a catch. They had to buy a flower before they got to make their picture.
So you got the last laugh. Okay, Bernard, muzzle loading a mule.
Now this, people don't realize, my sister worked at the visitor center there in Cades Cove for years and years, and she kept a daily log of crazy questions, and that's what she called it. And at the end of every season, this paper would go to the 3 or 4 tablets would go to the headquarters in Gatlinburg and make the rounds. And everyone would get a laugh about it, and the supervisor sometimes would mark one out, and he'd say, that's a little bit too much. But my Uncle Charlie was the miller at the cable mill at that time. And at that time, they had a muzzle-loading rifle that he would shoot and give a demonstration every day how to load the thing and how to fire it and everything. But and in the fall, they would have a mule to pull the molasses mill, and they'd make molasses. And use that mule to squeeze the juice out of the cane. But some tourists got the two confused some way and thought that they were going to muzzle load the mule.
Okay, we've got 2 more in tourist questions, and we'll let you go. One of them was, we would get a little advice sometimes from the tourists on, I guess, farming operations or whatever, but they would point out something they saw that they thought was a little out of the ordinary to you. And one, we had a little a red cow that didn't look like our Herefords at all. That would, she was our milk cow, and she would run. She was smaller. She would run down in the field with our other cattle, Well, some tourists stopped Daddy one time, and they'd been seeing her, and they said, we've been noticing that you have a deer hanging around in your cow herd. And Daddy said, yeah, we milk her. And the last one involves a guy that we all knew and loved, the name of Clifton Dunn. He grew up around Townsend. He was a maintenance man in the Cove. Clifton, he would stop and chat a little bit on his way by and let you know what they were going to be doing with roads or culverts or anything. Clifton he was not an interpreter. He was not a ranger. He was a maintenance man. And guess what? Clifton wanted to do his job. So he'd get hounded all the time. Peck, 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 peck. They'd ask him these questions. So one time, Clifton, I guess, had about all the questions he could handle for one day. And somebody tapped him on the shoulder and said, do you have an idea of the age of these Smoky Mountains? And Clifton said, I don't know how old they are, but I know my grandpappy helped lay the foundation to them. That's all we have. Thank you very much.